The first week I moved back, I started sleeping in my clothes. Not because I was afraid. Not in the dramatic sense people imagine when they hear a sentence like that. I slept in leggings and a loose sweater because I no longer trusted the shape of interruption. I no longer trusted the difference between a knock and an entrance. I no longer trusted the idea that being tired, half awake, or in the middle of changing meant anyone would pause before crossing the threshold. That is the kind of thing people often dismiss if they have never lived inside it. They hear a complaint about privacy and picture a moody adult daughter wanting the romance of independence while paying no rent. They picture somebody young and precious and overly attached to the language of boundaries. What they do not picture is the exhausting alertness that comes from never fully believing a closed door will stay closed. I had been home 11 days when I realized my body still had not unclenched. 11 days of waking at every footstep in the hall. 11 days of minimizing my work calls because I was waiting for the knob to turn. 11 days of stepping out of the shower, already braced for a voice on the other side of the bathroom door, asking some question that could easily have waited. When I lived alone during school, I used to waste whole evenings in the most ordinary ways. Tea going cold beside me, laptop open. One sock on, one sock off. Music low. No performance required. No need to explain myself to the air. I did not understand until I came back how much of adulthood is simply the right to remain unobserved for a few hours at a time. Moving home was supposed to be temporary. I had finished my program, my lease was ending, and the practical choice was to stay with my parents for a season while I rebuilt savings and figured out where work would take me next. I told myself I was lucky to have somewhere to land. I told myself a few months of compromise was not a tragedy. I told myself I was older now, and older meant better at navigating family habits without letting them crawl under my skin. That was the theory. The reality was that childhood patterns have a way of waiting exactly where you left them. My mother has never believed she is intrusive. That would require her to accept that other people have an inner border she cannot cross on feeling alone. In her version of love, urgency belongs to whoever wants something first. If she needs to ask about laundry, she asks now. If she wants to check whether I saw a text from my aunt, she opens the door now. If she remembers some recipe, some errand, some package, some cousin's engagement, some minor household concern, then whatever I am doing becomes background noise to the importance of her arrival. When I was a teenager, people called it closeness. When I left for school, they called it devotion. Now that I was home again at 24, I started using a quieter word for it: access. The worst part was not even the entering itself. It was the expectation beneath it. The assumption that I should always be available in some unfinished way. Not gone. Not fully separate. Not unreachable, even for 10 minutes inside my own room. By the 4th day, she had walked in while I was changing. By the 6th, she had pushed the door open in the middle of a client call because she wanted to know whether I had seen a saucepan lid. By the 8th, she had opened it after midnight because she thought she heard me coughing and wanted to bring tea, which might have sounded tender if she had not switched on the overhead light without asking. I sat there, squinting like a startled animal, while she explained that I should be grateful somebody cared enough to check. Gratitude is often recruited to excuse the things consent would reject. That was one of the first adult lessons I learned too late. I tried diplomacy. That is the inheritance of daughters raised in homes where directness is treated like aggression. I said I was still adjusting. I said I needed uninterrupted work time. I said I slept lightly and got disoriented when the door opened in the night. I said, as gently as I could, that I wanted a key to the bedroom lock. My mother smiled, the smile people use when they think they are humoring a temporary phase. She said, of course. She said she would look for it. She said it had to be in the junk drawer or one of the old tins near the pantry. She said there was no need to order anything or make a fuss because surely it would turn up. It did not turn up that day. Or the next week. Every few evenings I ask it again. She always had an answer prepared. She had forgotten. She had looked, but then gotten busy. She thought Dad might have moved it. She was sure it would appear eventually. Her tone held that familiar mix of reassurance and annoyance, the kind designed to make a simple request feel faintly theatrical. Meanwhile, the interruptions continued. A question about postage. A question about dinner. A reminder to call my grandmother. A comment on the laundry basket. One morning she opened the door with her elbow while carrying folded towels and stopped mid-sentence because I was asleep without a bra on under my t-shirt. She laughed awkwardly and backed out and later told me I was being dramatic when I said I needed her to knock and wait. Wait for what? She asked, as if the answer were not obvious, as if I were unreasonable for wanting the tiny pause in which a person chooses whether to let you in. It is amazing how fast you can start doubting your own standards when the environment around you insists they are excessive. I began rehearsing my case in private. Shouldn't an adult be able to sleep behind a locked door? Shouldn't working from home count as work? Shouldn't changing clothes in your own room be enough reason to expect privacy without negotiation? Every time I had to build the argument from scratch, I understood a little more clearly that the problem was not the door. The problem was that my need had to become a courtroom brief before it could even be heard. A friend of mine, Nora, listened to me complain on speaker while I reorganized my desk for the third time in 1 week. She was quiet for a moment and then asked, "Do you think she actually lost the key?" I remember standing very still with a stack of notebooks in my hands because I had been treating the missing key as absent-mindedness, a nuisance, a family inconvenience. But the question rearranged the whole thing. Not because I knew the answer immediately, because my body did. No, I thought. Not really. I don't think she lost it. I think she dislikes what it means. That afternoon, I ordered a temporary travel lock online. Nothing dramatic. Just a simple device you could fit onto an interior door when you needed uninterrupted privacy. I did not order it to start a war. I ordered it because I was tired of pleading for what should have been ordinary. I ordered it because exhaustion has a way of stripping politeness down to clarity. The package came 2 days later. I was in my room answering emails when I heard my mother call my name from the kitchen. Then I heard it again, sharper. By the time I opened the door, she was already halfway down the hall, holding the small cardboard envelope in her hand. "What is this?" she asked. There are questions that are not really questions. There are tones that tell you the answer has already been judged before you speak. Her face had that look mothers sometimes wear when they believe a child has become influenced by an outside world that has made her colder than necessary, as if privacy were a fad I'd picked up somewhere among strangers. "It's a temporary lock," I said. "I need to be able to close my door when I'm working or sleeping." She blinked. Then she laughed once, lightly, the way people do when they want their own disbelief to stand in for logic. "That's for hotels," she said. "Not here. Not here." As if home were the one place I should expect least from a door. I told her I had asked for the room key more than once and still did not have it. I told her this would solve the problem until it turned up. I was calm when I said it, calmer than I felt, because by then I understood that any visible frustration would become the new subject. What happened next took less than a minute. I know, because the tea kettle had just started to hiss in the kitchen, and had not reached its full whistle yet. My mother went very still. Not hurt, not confused, still. Then she said, "Wait here," with the clipped authority of somebody offended that a workaround had been attempted without her approval. She disappeared down the hall. I heard the pantry door, a drawer slide, the metal rattle of something small being moved among other small things. Then she came back, holding the brass bedroom key between two fingers. "There," she said. "Found it." That was the moment. Not the interruptions, not the package, not even the key itself. The speed, the effortless speed. Some truths arrive like accusations. Others arrive like timing. If a thing can be found in under a minute only after you prove you are prepared to protect yourself another way, then the thing was never truly missing. Maybe it had been misplaced once. Maybe it had migrated from one drawer to another. But the real obstacle had not been confusion. It had been willingness. I looked at the key in her hand and felt something old inside me settle into a harder shape. Not rage. Rage would almost have been easier. What I felt was recognition, the kind that carries grief inside it. Because once you see a pattern clearly, you also see how many times you mistook it for something smaller. Forgetfulness, concern, habit, generational difference. Love expressed imperfectly. "What?" she said, noticing my face. I said I'd find it. I wanted to ask why now. Why not last week? Why not the week before, when I was half-dressed and furious and trying not to sound rude? Why not after the third interrupted call? Why not after I told her I could not sleep properly? But all of those questions had the same answer, because until the boundary became real, she had not needed to take it seriously. So I asked the only question that mattered. Was it really lost? Her mouth tightened. People often tell on themselves in the half-second between being understood and regaining control. "I don't like the tone you're taking," she said. There it was. The oldest escape route in the book. Not an answer. A complaint about delivery. I said, "I've been asking for this for 2 weeks." She said, "And I told you I would handle it." Handle it. Another revealing phrase. As though my request had never been mine to solve. As though privacy was a privilege she could dispense on her timeline, rather than a condition I was allowed to require. I took the key from her hand. It was warm from her skin, smaller than the argument it had become. That is how symbols work. They look ridiculous up close, right, until you understand what they have been carrying. That night, I locked my door. Not loudly. Not as theater. Just one clean turn of metal, before I changed into pajamas and set my phone face down on the desk. I sat on the bed afterward and waited for the guilt. It had always arrived before, whenever I disappointed somebody by protecting myself in a visible way. I expected the familiar tug. She's your mother, this is temporary, you could be easier, you could be kinder, you could just adapt. But what arrived instead was silence. Real silence. Not the thin silence of listening for footsteps. The deep kind. The kind with weight. I had not realized how long it had been since I could hear a room, without also hearing the possibility of interruption inside it. Later there was a knock. A proper one this time. 3 taps. Then, her voice, flatter than usual, asking whether I wanted any tea. I said, "No, thank you." She did not come in. I sat there staring at the door, absurdly close to tears, over something as simple as a question remaining a question. People who have never been worn down by little invasions think relief should look more glamorous. It does not. Sometimes relief is just getting to finish a thought while fully dressed or half-dressed or sleeping or awake with nobody claiming your attention by default. Sometimes relief is realizing that peace is not a luxury item. Sometimes relief is a lock turning once and the whole room finally becoming legible as yours. The next morning, my mother behaved as if the situation had become a referendum on her goodness. She asked whether I really thought she was some kind of monster. She said she had only ever cared about me. She said families should not need barriers. That last line stayed with me all day. Families should not need barriers. It sounds warm when you say it quickly. What it usually means is that one person preferred the old arrangement where the barrier benefited everyone except the person without it. Nora called that afternoon to ask what happened. When I told her, she laughed once in pure disbelief and said, "So the key existed the second she realized you might not need her permission anymore." That was it exactly. Not just control in the loud sense. Control in the soft domestic sense. The power to delay. The power to minimize. The power to keep you asking. The comments people later made when I described the situation all converged in roughly the same place. Not because everyone had identical families, but because the mechanism was so recognizable. They did not hear a bratty daughter refusing to respect the household. They heard a grown woman asking for one defensible square of privacy, and a parent reacting as if that square were betrayal. They heard the hidden insult in the found key. They heard the message beneath the delay. I preferred you interruptible. That was the part one could not unlearn once I saw it. The problem had never been the hardware. It had never been the door, or the key, or even the temporary lock in its padded envelope. The problem was that my mother had been comfortable as long as my access to myself remained negotiable. She wanted me available enough to enter, available enough to check, available enough to correct, available enough to keep proving that my private life could still be reached by simply turning the handle. I do not think every family conflict needs a dramatic ending. Sometimes the most honest ending is smaller and more useful. I stayed for the months I had planned. I saved money. I worked with the key turned when I needed to. I stopped arguing about whether privacy was loving or rude and started treating it like plumbing, a basic condition of a livable house, not a philosophical dispute. And I paid attention. That may have been the real turning point. Not the lock itself, but the fact that I finally understood the pattern clearly enough to stop explaining it away. Once you see that somebody experiences your independence as a personal slight, a lot of history reorganizes itself. You stop asking the wrong question. The wrong question is, why are they making such a big deal out of a door? The right question is, why did my closed door feel like a loss to them at all? I still think about the speed with which she found that key. How quickly metal answered what weeks of conversation never had. How 1 minute can expose an entire arrangement. And if you want the truth, that was the first moment I understood that leaving home is not always about moving your body somewhere else. Sometimes it begins when you decide that a locked door does not require apology. Sometimes it begins when you hear a knock and realize you are allowed to choose whether it opens.
Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, do me one favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops. Remember, nothing is ever just what it seems. See you on the next one.